Open our hearts and minds to hear and receive your message for our lives. Now may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my rock and our Redeemer. Amen. It may have all started in New York City, the power lunch, and the ethos of vanity eating. Something about New York and the rush and push of the place, the office job and the 1-hour lunch break, it bred a horde of speed eaters going to grab a sandwich or something hot from a food cart and run a quick errand before going back to your desk. The American lunch break became more of a sprint for freedom from the office than a meal for nourishment. In 1979, Esquire magazine published an article about a new trend in Manhattan's midtown celebrity restaurants. Instead of offering a more typical multi-course meal of rich food at lunchtime, they designed a more efficient gourmet meal that could be prepared in 12 minutes and served, consumed, and paid for in just under 45. There was status in being able to sit down for a meal at midday instead of rushing back to the office. And yet, keeping the dining time to a strict limit of 1 hour allowed business moguls and movie agents and politicians to be focused, productive, and fed while they powered on. 10 years later, the film Wall Street appeared, Oliver Stone's production about a corporate raider named Gordon Gekko and his unquenchable thirst for money and power and complete lack of scruples in acquiring them. In one quotable line, Gekko destroyed the power lunch forever. When asked if he would take a break for lunch by his young associate, Gekko spits out at him, "Lunch is for wimps." Frenetic deal-making had finally replaced lunch altogether with a sense that riches had to be pursued before they disappear. The power lunch, or the pursuit of power without lunch, both present images of status-seeking undermined by high anxiety. The idea that there are only limited resources, dollars, power, fame, and you have to take what you can get it for yourself before the other guy gets in ahead of you. It's called the theology of scarcity. And living in that space is a self-defeating death spiral. When the glass is always half empty, there's no escaping, no growth, no chance for renewal, no second chances, no hope. Our text this morning offers a very different picture. The story of Jesus feeding 5,000 with the abundance and power of God's love. Christ's counter-theology of abundance offers all of us a liberating way of life that is hope-filled and confident. Abundance encourages our own generosity and calms our nerves. The power of love proves to be the most powerful of all. But do you remember how the story starts? The very first verse. When Jesus heard about this, he withdrew in a boat to a deserted place by himself. What had Jesus heard about? We need to put this text into context. We come to this passage on the heels of another, the tragic, violent story of the death of John the Baptist at the hands of King Herod. It's a story of power and lust and greed and despotism. It ends in death and powerlessness. The story of Herod with a banquet. Worldly power and greed is meant to contrast with the story of Jesus feeding 5,000, a higher power and generous abundance that enlivens people rather than destroying them. What Jesus heard that day on the shore of the Sea of Galilee was the news of the murder of his cousin John. Jesus was reacting to the murder of John the Baptist, and so was the crowd of the 5,000 men plus women and children who followed him. Suddenly our story is redrawn. We're meant to make the connection, and now we can. Here's the backstory that you need to know. Herod was a ruthless ruler. He was the son of the first King Herod, who made himself famous for killing all the baby boys in Bethlehem after Jesus' birth, trying to capture and destroy Jesus before he could grow to be a rival. His son Herod was the Gordon Gekko of the Palestinian territory. He was power-hungry, jealous of Jesus, and angry at John. John had a following of his own. He was popular among the people, a proven prophet, and now he was making judgmental statements fearlessly about Herod's personal life. Herod had developed a love interest in his brother Philip's wife Herodias. Things must have developed to the point of public knowledge, for John called out Herod, proclaiming noisily that it was unlawful for him to marry his brother's wife. Herod wanted to kill John ever since, but he did not, for he feared the crowds. He put John in prison instead to get him out of the way and out of hearing. A lifelong prison sentence might have been the end of it, but things quickly got worse. Herod had a dinner party. It was his birthday banquet, and he invited Herodias as his special guest, and with her came her daughter, who danced for Herod and the guests over dinner and left them spellbound. Herod wanted to impress his lover by offering her daughter anything she wanted in all the kingdom. And Herodias, who was equally angry with John the Baptist for calling out her budding love affair with her brother-in-law, jumped at the offer. She took her daughter aside and said to her, "Ask Herod to bring you John the Baptist's head on a plate." And she did. Herod immediately regretted the promise he'd made to her. To grant her wish meant the death of John and an insurrection among the people. Mobs would roam the street clamoring for justice. But he had made a solemn pledge in front of all his guests. Herod, the self-proclaimed power magnate of Palestine, was now powerless in the face of a little girl's wishes. What an embarrassment. But he had no choice. He had John beheaded in prison, and they brought John's head in on a plate. It was John's disciples who came and buried his body and told Jesus what had happened. And when Jesus heard this terrible news, he withdrew to a deserted place. That's where our story picks up. Jesus would have been tired. He'd been teaching and preaching and healing, and then nearly run out of town after an awkward incident in Nazareth a few days before. He was at a low place in his ministry, despite his loyal following. He wanted to rest. And then this happened. When Jesus heard about John, about what they did to John, his cousin, a man of God, Jesus tries to withdraw in a boat to grieve. But the people come to him. The people who had been following John, who had heard John proclaiming Jesus as Lord, they came from the cities. And the people who had been following Jesus, who now heard the news about John, they come from the towns. All these people rushed to find Jesus, to follow Jesus, to get guidance. What shall we do? How should we respond? Maybe they were angry. Perhaps they were afraid. It must have looked like a mob scene. It could have turned ugly. It could have become a violent insurrection targeted against Herod. All Jesus had to do was say the word. But instead, he does something very different. When Jesus saw them, he had compassion upon them, and he healed their sick. That's the first thing Jesus does. He loves them. He showed compassion. When evening comes, Jesus' disciples come to him and say, "This is an isolated place. It's getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go into the villages and buy food for themselves." But that's scarcity talk. That's Gordon Gekko speak. The disciples are telling Jesus to let the people fend for themselves. Jesus offers them love in abundance. He sets them straight. There's no need to send them away. You'll give them something to eat. Notice it's not Jesus who feeds the crowds, it's his disciples. Like you and me. He empowers the disciples and gives them the task. You feed them, because I know you can. But the disciples, they still don't get it. They are still living in that Gordon Gekko world. They don't see the kingdom of God Jesus offers, the new way of living that is bigger and more abundant and all-inclusive than anything they can imagine. We have nothing here, they complain, except 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. They can only see the scarcity. So Jesus takes the bread and serves the first communion. It's not the Last Supper, but it is the first communion. Listen, he took the 5 loaves of bread and the 2 fish. He looked up to heaven and he blessed them. And then he broke the loaves apart and he gave them to the disciples. Communion by the lake. And then the disciples gave them to the crowds. Communion servers, just like church, just like us. God's grace. Everyone ate until they were full. Abundance. Then the passage ends with this odd phrase, and about 5,000 men, plus women and children, had eaten. 5,000 men. It used to bother me to hear women and children tacked on as mere extras. But this week, when I read this passage for about the 500th time, I heard something new. It came to me because I've been thinking about Gordon Gekko greed and King Herod's powerlessness and the violent mob that Herod was so afraid of, and how that mob came to Jesus in peace and in need of healing, and how Jesus had compassion for them and he healed them. There was no violent insurrection, perhaps to the chagrin of many young rebels among the oppressed Jewish people. Jesus did not call out a call to arms, and that's when I noticed the precision that Matthew gave in naming the number of men. About 5,000. And I remembered that 5,000 is the number of soldiers in a Roman legion. A legion was a troop division in the Roman army. That would be like describing a battalion of soldiers in the U.S. Army today. 5,000 men would have been symbolic for a battalion, a fighting force. And here is why this is so significant. Jesus was presented with a legion of men, soldiers, at his disposal. And when he learned the news of John the Baptist's murder, Jesus could have said, "Suit up and arm yourselves, men. We're going to fight Herod, and I want his head on a plate. We're going to start a revolution, and it's going to be a bloody one." But Jesus doesn't say that. Because Jesus is building something new. He's turning the world upside down in a way that says love is stronger than hate. There's enough for everybody. And as we move forward towards forgiveness, we're not moving backwards to retaliation. Love wins. Life is stronger than death. You can feed this crowd with God's love, with the food of the Spirit, with the hope of a better tomorrow, and there will be more than enough left to feed the world. Love. Love is the lifeblood of God's kingdom. It brings abundant blessings, more powerful than anything or anyone. It's enough to feed an army. And love also to avert a war. And it begins here at this table. Jesus took the loaves and blessed them and broke them and gave them to his disciples, saying, "Take, eat, share the love. It's powerfully good."